We're going to be talking about a viral documentary that Elon Musk basically pushed to every single Twitter user as their top, recommended ad on their feed for an entire day a couple days ago. Hashtag Detrans, the stories of detransitioners by PragerU. Now, a couple other lefty streamers have already watched good segments of this documentary, responded to it, and it's very laughably made. On a fundamental level, from what I've seen, you could honestly argue it's a pro-trans documentary. So I'm not really going to tread already walked ground here. I want to use this documentary as a bouncing board. A bouncing board? Sure, fine. Bouncing board. To essentially talk about something related to it. A discourse that stemmed from Springboard. Thank you, Kiwi TP. I'm high. A springboard into a topic related to it that's become discourse post the release of this documentary. Now, if you've been on Twitter, here's the ad, by the way. This was the top of everybody's For You page for an entire day. Every single Twitter user's For You page, this was the top of it. PragerU bought out an ad space here so that every Twitter user on the entire platform for the entire day would have this as the top of their thing, right? So, with that in mind, tons of people no doubt saw this. Tons of people no doubt saw this. What the reaction was overall, I have no clue. I'm sure we'll find out over time, but what I want to talk about is the discourse that kind of came from it on Twitter. We started to see a lot of far-right accounts talking about what they claim to be the invention of trans people. And they reference a story that has been referenced by transphobes over and over again for years and years and years and years to make different transphobic arguments without realizing said story itself is an argument that backs up the validity of trans people. So, I'm gonna bring up the Wikipedia page for it. Alright. So, they reference the John Money, David Raymer experiment. Now, I'm not going to read the whole Wikipedia page because it's long and it's terrifying, so I'm going to summarize what happened. This is John Money. He was a massive piece of shit. A monster who I hope is burning in hell. You see, what he did was he had two twins, both twin boys, and one of them had a botched circumcision. They were obviously infants. In response to this, he decided to perform a very, no doubt, thrown together bottom surgery procedure on this child, David Raymer, and raise this child as a girl his entire life. Tell him he's a girl, make him wear girls' clothes, give him no indication that he could ever recognize himself as a boy, because how would he know, right? What ended up happening with this experiment, though, is David Raymer didn't grow up thinking that he was a girl. David Raymer, the whole time, deep down, knew he was a boy. He basically manifested gender dysphoria. He just did. He literally manifested gender dysphoria. He became depressed. He knew fundamentally he was in the wrong body, that he was supposed to be a boy. He knew that this was not how he was supposed to be, despite there not being any memories or evidence that he could pull from. He just fundamentally knew it deep down because that's what his brain wanted. That's what his brain knew his identity to be, because no one knows their identity better than themselves. No one will ever know their identity better than themselves. And so, while this was a horrific fucking experiment, this was a long time ago. I think it was in the 1950s or 60s, and I'm pretty sure he was in prison for it, the scientist. At least I hope so. And thank God, David Raymer was able to get away from that and transition back to being a man, because that's what he truly was. But this also acts as the first and most well-known example of gender dysphoria happening in someone who isn't trans, like, by the traditional sense. Like, they use this as an example of the start of transgenderism because it's an example of an adult forcing a kid to transition. This was just a mad scientist. This guy wasn't like left-wing or pro-trans by any means. He tortured these kids. He was just trying to satisfy his own creepy desires and curiosities. He was a fucking monster. But this wasn't some kind of like transing the kids thing. He was doing like unethical experimentation. Now, most of the people that you see shit-talking trans people are the same types of people who very mysteriously like to argue that, well, you see, the Nazis were bad, but they made a lot of really important scientific discoveries, and I don't think we should throw out any of their discoveries and developments in medicine or anything, just because they, discovered them through very awful means. I've heard conservatives and transphobes make that argument tons of times in reference to Nazi medical and science research, that it should still be used and accepted regardless of its acquisition, because it exists. Meanwhile, they use this story, which is basically an example of the same phenomena. Through this, we discovered that gender dysphoria is a fundamental thing that can happen to people. If you take a cis person and force them to exist as the opposite gender, they will likely feel dysphoria akin to what trans people feel and seek to transition. What this proved is that, in most people at least, there is a fundamental understanding of your identity that deep inside of you that no amount of having been raised the wrong way will be able to change. You will always know that deep down, right? And that proves that. It proves that even a cis person will experience it, not like who wants to transition back to being cis, back to the gender they were assigned at birth. With that in mind, it's interesting to me that conservatives so desperately try to use this as an example of like transness being bad, or like some of them will try to say that this is the only science that trans rights is based on, which is ridiculous because most of everything is based on modern day science and studies, and they call them that as a way of discrediting them too. But hey, do you guys want to hear how most conservatives, when debunked on these positions, tend to respond? I've been thinking that one of these days I should make a video, like I should just like start screenshotting hate comments that are like the most brain dead, worst responses to my videos and the arguments in my videos, and like just do a whole segment where I just go over hate comments. Because, like, you'll be able to see the depths of stupidity that the conservatives that comment on my stuff are willing to dip down to defend their positions. The other day, or yesterday, sorry, I was reading my comments, and someone had commented on my video where I was debunking some, like, turfy talking points, and I'd shown the SciShow video, the Hank Green video, where he goes over, like, the entire scientific consensus on gender and sex, and, we even went over the massive laundry list of studies, and a conservative replied, I forget what the first part of it was, but it was like discrediting, or not discrediting, but like dismissive and, obviously saying, oh, you're wrong, yada yada. Did you ever take a biology class? I remember they said. And the final thing they ended it off with will astonish you. Quote, you're just impressed by a laundry list of sources. That was their response to me pointing you guys towards a video that elaborates on my position with scientific citations and a massive list of medical and scientific institutions cited and sourced in the description for all the claims. Their response is, you're just impressed by a laundry list of sources. You need to understand that a lot of conservatives and transphobes fundamentally don't care about the truth. They are so deeply buried in their confirmation bias that they are insulted by the idea of somebody that disagrees with them daring to suggest that you would use citations or sources or medical consensus to inform your positions, that you would use reality or facts to inform what you believe. It's always been projection from these people. Every insult, every straw man, of the left has always been projection. One of the right's most classic arguments has been that the left uses feelings and the right uses facts. It is the biggest example of projection the right engages in. The right is as emotional with the way they found their positions, the way they defend them, and the way they adhere to them. The most emotional. The left gets emotional when advocating for them. That's the big difference, and the right takes advantage of that and tries to claim that means that the positions themselves are founded on nothing but emotions rather than facts and logic. And so, little scrawny nerds like Ben Shapiro were able to build quite significant media empires off of, guess what, lefties? Facts don't care about your feelings. So, here's my final position on this whole detrans thing. Trans people are valid, cope about it. There's really nothing else I can say. The scientific consensus is there. Wait, did we actually have that one funny Twitter video? The Soaked on Left one? Wait, Soaked on Left, you in chat? This is my favorite meme response to conservatives when I just don't... Like, I could go on listing, like, different arguments and then back each one up with, like, an example, or you can just play this video. One thing you have to remember, though, by the way, is conservatives, as I mentioned, are terrified of being exposed to the science and facts and logic that debunk their worldview. So if you send them, like, a study, they won't click it. They won't look at it. Like, you have to trick them into being exposed to that, like, inarguable data and that inarguable information and those inarguable studies, right? It's why when Ben Shapiro gets, like, ambushed by someone who knows, like, has those studies on hand at, like, a big live event or something, he freaks out and gets nervous. Matt Walsh, too, because, you know, they don't expect to actually have to confront what you're about to see. So this video was very geniusly crafted to have the first frame be some, like, Christian shit to trick them into watching it and clicking it, and then being bombarded with what's about to play. Watch this. Tried to play the audio. Nice try. Yeah, so basically there's been a lot of good memes like that have been made that just sort of, like, very quickly consolidate all of the studies and info. Not all of it, but a lot of the studies and info and stuff. And I like how it, like, tricks conservatives into actually clicking on it, and you got the troll face. Because, of course, as I said, they don't want to actually be exposed to any, you know, wrong think. So, here's my position on detransitioners. Trans people are valid, as we've established, which means we should absolutely allow, like, for trans people to have access to the ability to transition. Like, it's not some delusional, weird thing that's not appropriate or good. Like, we've established that the medical institutions back it up and they affirm it overwhelmingly. It's not like it's a, you know, it's not like a split issue or something there's still some questions about. It's very much a consensus. And so with that in mind, considering this is a thing that needs to happen, it needs to be an option, it needs to be available, we need to have a discussion about how best we reduce the amount of detransitioners. Why do people detransition? Well, statistically, data backs up the vast majority by a lot of detransitioners detransition for two big reasons. The biggest being lack of access to continued treatment for their transition, like they don't have money to buy hormones and whatnot, with the second biggest reason being lack of acceptance from family and friends, usually like outright rejection, that forces them to detransition and go back in the closet, so to say. Pretend like they're cis, for the acceptance of family and friends. Or for their own safety, even. It can go even further, right? That is the vast majority of detransitioners. So they're still trans. Like, they are still trans. They're just not transitioning now because of the situation they're in. Like, they would if they could. That does not mean that their transitioning was a mistake, by any means. Now, for the infinitesimally small fraction of detransitioners that genuinely regret it and made a mistake, well, those people need more readily accessible access, more readily accessible ability to speak to medical professionals and mental health professionals that specialize in this field. You're going to have less detransitioners if there are more gender clinics, like, and sexual health clinics, and like gender identity, like treatment clinics and what have you. Like, these are medical, like, facilities with trained professionals who specialize in this realm, right? The more of these people you have access to, the less likely you're going to have a false positive on a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And to be fair, most detransitioners that genuinely regret it are older. They're older gay men and women who back in the day, medical professionals didn't have the best, back in like the 70s and whatnot, they weren't as good at telling, is this person just gay or are they trans? And they'd say, no, you're trans. And so there are a fair amount of older gay or older ex-trans people, like detransitioners, who were just gay and like misdiagnosed as trans or self-diagnosed as trans. A lot of like detransitioners self-diagnosed themselves as trans or as having gender dysphoria a long time ago. Now, the funny thing is, this documentary that has gone viral features 2 detransitioners as like the stars of it. And from what I've seen, one of them says that they still have dysphoria and they still aren't happy in their body, even after detransitioning, and they still feel dysphoria and they still feel like they're the opposite gender. Like, in the documentary, they said that. It really is astonishing at like how poor some of these right-wing outlets are at actually making the compelling propaganda outside of just pouring tons of money into it. They think if you just invest enough money into spreading an idea or a talking point, then that's all it takes. You don't have to put any more work in it than that. Just throw enough money at the belief and people will believe it, I guess. Anyway, overall, that's my take on the whole detransition documentary.